Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video by a channel that was sent to me by Demigod Reject, Faded Pixels. In this video he discusses 5 statements made by atheists that are supposedly self-defeating, so let's take a look.
And so here I've compiled 5 self-defeating statements from atheists. Now I understand that you might be an atheist watching this video who might not agree with these statements, but many atheists do, so it's important to recognize these.
Thank you for recognizing that atheists are not a homogeneous group. In this video, I will be discussing my own opinions on these statements as to whether or not they are self-defeating and whether or not I agree with them. But it is important to recognize that the opinions of atheists on these matters can be quite divided at times, so I can't even begin to pretend to speak for everybody.
It's important first to define what a self-defeating statement is. A self-defeating statement is not a statement that is counterproductive and works against the position of the proponent of the statement. For example, if you're in a debate with a friend and you respond to his rational arguments by saying, "You're stupid," you actually expose your stupidity more than anything else. But that doesn't make the statement, "You're stupid," self-defeating.
I mean, I could quibble here about the fact that it depends on what came before the "you're stupid" statement, but let's just get on to what you say a self-defeating statement is, rather than what it is not.
An example of a self-defeating statement is to say that all truth is relative. This relies on an objective truth to deny any objective truth, and is thus self-defeating.
I mean, that depends entirely on your definition of truth. I am personally a fan of Pelagia's definition that truth is the extent to which a proposition conforms to reality as adjudicated by predictive power. This definition makes truth relative by definition rather than by the truth of the statement itself. So using that definition, saying that all truth is relative is true, because truth is relative to reality. I'll leave a link to Paul's video where he explains it in more detail, but in a nutshell, truth is the extent to which a proposition conforms to reality, which makes truth a spectrum. Truth itself is not black or white. It is possible for 2 statements to be true, but for one to be more true than the other one. For instance, "I have kids" is a true statement. "I have 3 kids" is more true because it is closer to the reality of my family situation than the first statement. How true a statement is relative to how close that statement conforms to reality.
Keep in mind this example, as we'll come back to it later in the video. But with that being said, without further ado, let's look at the 5 most self-defeating statements from atheists. Statement number 5. You can't impose your morals on others.
Where did you get this statement? I really hope you clarify it a bit. I especially don't like the word "can't" in there, as obviously you can impose your morals on others in the sense that you are able to, especially if we're speaking legalistically here, where laws are constantly made and updated to match the morality of the general population. If you actually got that statement from an atheist source, it should be, you shouldn't impose your morals on others. And even then, I'm tempted to say that if we are applying this to law, it's not that we shouldn't impose our morals onto others, it's a question of to what degree should we impose our morals onto others. I think most of us would agree that the moral "murder is bad" is a good one to impose on others. This is where the old adage about how your right to swing your fist ends at my face comes in. If you want to perform an action that I consider immoral, but ultimately it doesn't do any harm, then you should be allowed to do it, and I should not be able to impose my morality on you. And it should work both ways.
When discussing politics and social issues, this is often thrown at religious people. Keep your faith to yourself, you can't tell anybody what to do. This itself, however, is a moral statement imposed on others, telling them what to do.
Well, the way you phrased it, it's actually a statement saying that it's not possible for them to impose their morals on others. If you actually meant that they should not, then an argument could be made that it's self-defeating, but as to whether or not it actually is self-defeating relies entirely on context.
The word "can't" in this context isn't talking about the ability to make a moral statement, as it is made in response to someone who clearly can or already has made a moral statement.
This was your video, buddy. You're not replying to someone who actually said that. You could have rephrased it yourself to mean what you meant, without having to clarify instead of wasting time on this.
So it's obviously talking about morality or ethics. Hence, it is self-defeating to suggest that nobody can tell anybody what to do, because the statement itself tells somebody what to do.
Again, it depends on the context. In the case of politics, it's quite a bit more complicated than just whether or not we should tell people what to do, because politics are all about enacting policies that tell people what they can and cannot do. This statement needs a whole lot more examination than the 30 seconds you gave it. So let's adjust the statement to, you shouldn't impose your morals on others, since we both seem to agree that that's what's meant anyway. Yes, this is a moral statement, but is it being imposed on the other person? If you left it at cant, then the implication is that the person making the statement is actually doing something to force the other person to not impose their morals on others. So that would make it self-defeating. Is that why you left it at cant? Because shouldn't leaves it open. We're having a discussion as to the implications of imposing a particular morality on someone that doesn't necessarily agree with it. It is something that is examined on a case-by-case basis. When paired with politics, what it comes down to is usually an examination of harm versus benefit. So, for instance, a libertarian might say that taxation is theft and it harms the people who pay it, therefore taxes are immoral because it infringes on your right to own property. But then your right to own property is enforced by the police that are paid for with taxes. So most people would agree that a certain amount of taxation is necessary to society. But what about something like anal sex? Anal sex in general is banned in 13 states, and specifically homosexual anal sex is banned in 3 more. Why is a consensual sexual act between adults considered a crime? I should clarify here, a 2003 Supreme Court decision set the precedent that these laws are unconstitutional, but that only applies to private anal sex, so you can't film Anal Destruction 4 in Georgia. In a harm versus benefit analysis, I could see some argument being made that the porn industry harms the people performing in it, and in some cases that is true, but private consensual anal sex is still technically a crime in some states. It harms no one. If you have a problem with anal sex, then don't have anal sex. But I can't see how any good argument could possibly be made that 2 consenting adults, straight, gay, whatever, should not engage in anal sex because someone who is not participating in that particular sexual act thinks it's immoral. So to summarize this point, nobody holds the position that you can't impose your morals on others, and those that hold you shouldn't impose your morals on others tend to take it on a case-by-case basis and apply it in a political situation rather than in personal ones. Because ultimately, if you see a preacher yelling at a gay couple and you tell them that they shouldn't impose their morals on others, remember, nobody here is actually imposing their morals on each other. They are making suggestions that ultimately they cannot enforce, so by definition, they are not imposing anything.
Statement number 4. You should question everything.
I can't wait to find out how you're going to attempt to show this is self-defeating.
The favorite slogan of skeptics is the iconic question everything.
Yeah, sure. Question everything. Trust but verify. Don't take people on their words, and that includes me. Don't take me on my word either.
The problem is, the statement, if applied to itself, should be questioned.
Yes. Yes, it should. Why should you question everything? Because sometimes people lie, and even when people don't lie, they can be mistaken. Makes sense? Seems like a good rule to apply. But remember, a self-defeating statement is a statement whose conclusion is rendered false by the act of holding the statement to be true. So like how the sentence, "This sentence is a lie," cannot be true. When I question the statement, "Question everything," I find that it's good advice and holds true. Ergo, it is not self-defeating.
But then we'd have to question why we're questioning it, because the statement, "question everything," is currently under question. The word question doesn't even sound like a word anymore.
Nah, it still sounds like a word to me. Just because you phrased the statement awkwardly does not make it false. The real question here is, what do you think we should not question?
The point is, the statement relies on that the action in the statement itself cannot be carried out.
But it can, though. I did question it and found that it's good advice. Took me all of 30 seconds to do it.
Note that this isn't to suggest that we shouldn't question anything, but it is self-defeating to suggest that we should question everything.
Not by my definition of self-defeating, unless you're defining it differently. But since you only defined it by giving an example, we'll never know.
Statement number 3. We shouldn't believe anything that isn't empirically verified.
I really want to know where you're getting these statements. You did make it clear at the beginning that you understand that not all atheists hold these positions, but you keep coming up with points that aren't held by any atheist that I know. Any empiricist worth their salt will tell you that there are some things that are just not worth verifying. If you tell me that you just got a dog, that statement could very well be a lie. But I have no reason to believe that you would lie about it, since I know that dogs exist, and I know that people having dogs as pets is fairly common. I don't know any strict empiricist who would insist that you demonstrate not only that you have a dog, but that it is actually your dog. Now, if you tell me that a magical man in the sky created us 6,000 years ago and wants me to fundamentally change how I live my life, I'm going to need some empirically verifiable evidence that this guy actually exists before I act on this information. Now, for the record, I don't know if this Faded Pixels guy is a creationist or not, but it seems likely given that he posted part of a talk in which J. Warner Wallace quotes Michael Behe. Not really a good look for anyone who doesn't want to look like a creationist, but I don't want to accuse him of thinking the Earth is young without, verifying that statement first.
This is the view of verificationism, that only things scientifically verifiable are worthy of discussion and have any meaning to them. A typical verificationist would say that the question of God's existence is meaningless because it cannot be scientifically verified.
I wouldn't say that the question is meaningless, but since it cannot be verified, we can't just assume that it is true. The default scientific position is to not accept a claim until evidence is presented, evaluated, and found to be overwhelmingly in favor of that particular claim over any competing claims. Since there is no evidence for God that is not exclusively evidence for God, then scientifically speaking, there is no reason to accept the God claim. And as I usually do at points like this in my video, I will point out that there are many religious scientists out there, so it is not like it's impossible to hold a belief in God while practicing science.
But if we are to believe that we should only believe things that are empirically verified, then we shouldn't believe that we should only believe that things are empirically verified because that itself is not empirically verified.
Yeah, but I'm not convinced that you got that statement from an atheist source. It seems to me more like you're stripping nuance away from statements that atheists do actually make, and then arguing that these de-nuanced statements are self-defeating. On its face, I agree with you that the general application of the idea of not believing anything at all until it's empirically verified is not a good idea. But when applied to something like religion, the question is too important to just accept the idea of a God's existence without any form of verification. So yeah, tell me you have a dog and I will not require empirical verification to believe you. But tell me that you have a personal relationship with the all-powerful creator of the universe who for some reason doesn't like it when people eat shellfish, I'm gonna need you to back up that claim. Like, seriously, look at the book of Leviticus, read through its ridiculous rules, and explain to me why the all-powerful creator of the universe cares about such trivial nonsense. Imagine, as a human, not only wanting a personal relationship with an ant, but being annoyed if the ant eats the wrong food to the point where you want to torture this ant that you love for all of eternity. And did I mention that when the ants gather to worship you, the lead ant for the worship has to be wearing very specific clothing? I feel like I'm a bit off topic at this point though, so back to you.
Verificationism cannot live up to its own standard. Science, and the way we perform experiments, is built on numerous presuppositions that are outside of empirical verificationism.
Yes it is. And the goal here is to try and minimize the presuppositions necessary. Just to put this out there, my presuppositions are that reality exists independent of minds, that other people with minds of their own exist, and that reality will behave in fundamentally the same way tomorrow as it does today. None of these three things can be empirically verified to the point where we can have absolute certainty in any of them, yet they are the basis for everything else that I know or believe that I know about the world. Now remember, the goal is to have as few presuppositions as possible, because ultimately your presuppositions can't be empirically verified. Adding God to the list of presuppositions just adds another layer of something that you presuppose that can't be verified. This doesn't mean that a God of some kind doesn't exist, but it does mean that it would be best if we don't start with the assumption that God exists. And credit where it's due, I did watch Apologia's Knowledge Without God video a few times before writing this. His videos on truth and knowledge without God are some of my favorites on his channel. I highly recommend checking them out. As of this writing, there are at least 15,000 of you guys who are not subscribed to Paul. That is objectively morally evil. Go subscribe to him.
Similar to the last statement, this is not to suggest that empirical verification cannot give us anything, but that it is self-defeating to suggest that science is the only fountain of knowledge.
It really is, though. Yes, as admitted, I do not apply the idea of empirical verification to all aspects of my life. But when it comes to the important knowledge that actually affects your life, it's best to stick with empiricism. Nothing important has ever been learned through faith. Sure, people of faith have made scientific discoveries, but it's not like God told anyone about germs. We learned about that for ourselves. God didn't tell anyone about vaccines. We figured that one out too. God didn't tell us about astronomy. That was us again. I could go on. Has God ever told us anything reliable?
Statement number 2. Morality is subjective.
Well, this depends on how you look at it. I have made statements in the past that suggest that I'm actually on the side of objective morality, but this is usually with regards to the goal of minimizing harm and maximizing benefit. So we can make objective evaluations about the morality of a particular action with regards to a predetermined goal, but this goal is necessarily subjective. So morality is objective in a subjective kind of way. And it's kind of a definitional thing too, so in morality, to be truly objective means that something is right or wrong regardless of what sentient beings think is right or wrong. I don't think morality can be truly objective, because if you remove the sentient beings from the universe, morality ceases to exist. In order for something to be moral or immoral, there needs to be intent behind an action. An asteroid smashing into a planet is neither moral nor immoral, it is amoral. It's not until you have sentient beings performing actions with regards to other sentient beings that morality even starts to exist, so it is ultimately subjective, or else it would exist without the sentient beings.
Also known as moral relativism, this is the view that morality is based on opinion.
I mean, ultimately, even in my examples where I've appeared to take the side of objective morality, it's based on our opinion of what the goals of morality should be. So, ignoring your oversimplified use of the phrase moral relativism, I don't actually see how morality could be anything but opinion, as it doesn't appear to exist until beings capable of having opinions exist.
Morality is defined as the nature of right and wrong, which are factual statements.
Okay, you're going oversimplified again. If we're talking philosophy, you need to differentiate whether you're talking about descriptive morality or normative morality, and even then it's hard to pin down an exact definition. You appear to be trying to talk philosophically, but you're using the common dictionary definition, and you're slightly rephrasing it to make it work for you, because the standard dictionary definition is principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good and bad behavior. This does not assume subjective or objective morality, as it says nothing to the subjectivity or objectivity of these principles.
So to say that morality is subjective and relative is to say that certain facts and truths are relative.
I mean, truth is a spectrum. Some things can be more true than others. How true something is relative to how well it matches reality. I went to work on Saturday is true. I started my shift on Saturday at 4:15 is more true. I started my shift on Saturday at 4:15 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time is still more true. Using reality as a measuring stick, the closer something matches up to reality, the more true that thing is. And the only truths that we humans can actually demonstrate to be absolute are ones that are definitional by nature, so cannot be any other way purely by definition. These include mathematical concepts. As we define 2 and 4 in base 10, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is an absolute truth. Moral truths don't appear to be absolute, and then even the fact of 2 plus 2 equaling 4 is relative to our definitions of the numbers. In base 4, 2 plus 2 is 10. In base 3, 2 plus 2 is 11. There are 10 kinds of people in the world, those who understand binary and those who do not. But this is beyond the scope of what you seem to be talking about. You're just starting with the presupposition that moral facts exist and are absolute. I do not share that presupposition, and if you want to convince me of it, you need to demonstrate it rather than assert it.
Remember the example I used near the beginning of the video? An example of a self-defeating statement is to say that all truth is relative. This relies on an objective truth to deny any objective truth, and is thus self-defeating. So truth cannot be relative or based on opinion.
And remember the beginning of my video where I show that this depends entirely on your definition of truth and pointed out that the definition I favor makes truth relative to reality? To reiterate, truth is the extent to which a proposition conforms to reality as adjudicated by predictive power. When you make a claim that something is true, that is the proposition. How do we determine whether or not this claim conforms to reality? Predictive power. If I say I have a car, you can make certain predictions based on this claim. That there will probably be a car in my driveway when I'm home, that I will have a set of keys to operate this car, that if you look at the ownership papers for the car, my name will be on it, that there will be an insurance policy on this car with my name on it, and so on and so forth. The extent to which the claim I have a car conforms to reality is determined by how many of these predictions it fulfills. And again, this is a spectrum. It is possible that I have a car in my driveway and I have the keys to the car, but the ownership and insurance are in my wife's name, not mine. I do have the car, so the statement remains true, but I do not own the car, making the statement slightly less true than if I did own the car.
It is true that people have opinions, but there isn't truth because people have opinions. To say that morality is subjective is self-defeating. It's essentially saying it is objectively true that morality is subjective.
And how exactly is that self-defeating? It is objectively true that our personal experiences are subjective. Is that a self-defeating statement? Our personal experiences are by definition subjective. So then also by definition, it is an objective fact that our personal experiences are subjective. So if it is an objective fact that morality is dependent on the existence and opinions of sentient beings, then it would be true objectively that morality is subjective.
There either is morality, which is by definition objective, or there isn't.
Morality would only be objective by definition because you defined morality to be objective. I have not seen it defined in a way that requires it to be objective anywhere else, except perhaps in apologetic circles that define morality as being God's nature or whatever else they use to escape the Euthyphro dilemma. But then that presupposes a God, and ultimately when looking for truth, we want to start with as few presuppositions as possible, so adding a God into the mix just confuses things.
And finally, statement number 1, Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. This is another favorite slogan of atheists and skeptics, which is often used as a quick dismissal to the idea of the supernatural, or God.
It's not so much a quick dismissal, rather it's a quick summarization of the concept that the more mundane a claim is, the less evidence is required in order to believe it. To go back to my earlier example, if you tell me you got a dog, that is a mundane claim. I know dogs exist. I know it is common for people to have pet dogs. How true the claim is will have zero overall impact on my life. So what evidence do I need to believe the claim? Not much at all, just your personal testimony that you got a dog is quite sufficient. And if it ends up being false, it doesn't make any difference to me at all. If you make a slightly more extraordinary claim that, say, your dog can jump higher than any other dog on the planet, then again, this claim ultimately has no overall impact on my life, but I would tend to disbelieve it unless you provide more evidence than just your word. You could show me your dog in the Guinness Book of World Records, for instance. The claim is slightly more extraordinary and requires slightly more evidence. If you claim that your dog is as smart as a human being and can speak English, then I will want even more evidence. Even if you show me a video, that probably won't be good enough because special effects are really good nowadays.
Perdóname, por favor, but my heart must speak. I only wish to say that if you ever need someone to lick inside your ears, or chew the hard-to-reach places, or share your slumber in the sun, I would be most honored to be that special someone.
Woof.
It could have been faked. I would need to meet the dog myself and have a conversation with it, so you can see that there is a relationship to the nature of the claim and how much evidence would be needed before the claim would be accepted.
But if this is true, then all claims about the extraordinary in favor of and against require extraordinary evidence.
That is called the reversal of the burden of proof. If you tell me that your dog speaks English but won't do it in front of anyone but you when you're alone with it, I do not need to provide evidence that your dog does not speak English. The claim will be dismissed until you provide supporting evidence, and then the evidence will be evaluated.
This means that the claim that all extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence itself requires extraordinary evidence.
Is it really an extraordinary claim, though? Really? Does it require an enormous amount of evidence in order to convince you that more evidence is required for a bigger claim? Now, to be fair, it's not an entirely valid statement. If something could be explained with what would be considered an extraordinary claim, but which does not have sufficient evidence, this does not mean that a competing claim with zero evidence is automatically more likely. This is simply a general principle which is essentially just advice to be skeptical of claims, especially big impressive claims, and withhold judgment one way or the other until evidence is presented and evaluated.
But if one were to provide such evidence, it would only work to validate a claim that, if validated, only raises the question all over again.
Yeah, but I wouldn't consider it to be an extraordinary claim, and even if it were, how would providing evidence to support it cause it to come into question again? Your logic doesn't quite flow there. If the claim extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence is backed up by extraordinary evidence, there is no new claim that requires more evidence. It has simply met its burden of proof. Ergo, it is not self-defeating. It might not hold to be universally true, but that does not mean it is self-defeating. And that's it for this one. The rest of his video is just a summary. Today's comment of the day comes to us from iFixPCs. Good screen name, by the way. I break PCs myself. iFixPCs says, Morals. What would the thinking action be if a self-proclaimed pedophile found a cure for cancer? Stew on that for a minute. I'm not sure what others would think because I'm not sure of what I would think. I heard this question posed somewhere and it's popped in my head several times. What would your thoughts be? Well, I think it's relatively easy to separate out scientific discoveries from the scientists' personalities. I would have no problem with that cure for cancer being used, but a self-proclaimed pedophile should definitely be on a watch list of some kind. I would use the cure if I or anyone in my family had cancer, but I would not want that person around my kids, even if they did save their lives. That's it for today. Remember to follow me on Twitter and Facebook and support me on Patreon. See you next time.